part of the new Federation of Malaysia, Singapore became an independent country. Coming under the leadership of one of the most influential figures of the 20th century, Lee Kuan Yew. He had led the campaign for Singapore's independence and is the person who transformed the tiny island into the economic powerhouse we know today. When Singapore first gained independence, it was largely discounted for a few different reasons. Not only was it largely impoverished, with around 2/3 of the population living in slums, but compared to their neighbours, Singapore had practically no natural resources. Malaysia at the time was a leading exporter of things like tin and rubber, and also had large proven oil reserves. But by comparison, Singapore was tiny, with relatively little to fall back on, and also faced a real risk of political instability. Fortunately for Singapore, its new leader was a visionary, and acted decisively to set the country up. Lee Kuan Yew recognised that the only resource Singapore had was its people and hard work. And to fully utilise this, he took 3 key actions, which were not obvious at the time, but in hindsight stand out as being influential. First was the adoption of English as the national language of Singapore. At the time, this faced a lot of opposition from those who favoured keeping cultural roots, but this was decisive in transforming Singapore into the international business hub it is today, and also helped with his second major action, to do everything possible to attract top global talent. Again, people thought Singapore should follow other Southeast Asian countries in a more protectionist approach, but Lee again disagreed and insisted on importing expertise to build a strong foundation for growth. The third and final action was a zero-tolerance approach to corruption. It's common for newly formed countries with so much potential to be ruined by corrupt actors, but by establishing a zero-tolerance approach and paying politicians well, Lee ensured that Singapore's governance was highly effective and kept integrity. By doing this, Singapore was attracting investment from abroad, whilst also focusing on developing its own citizens as a resource. In order to attract more investment and talent, it would need highly skilled people of its own, and so Lee began to develop its own advanced education system. He was a firm believer in meritocracy, and this was reflected in the school systems with something called streaming, which from 1980 separated children at a young age into 3 groups: express, normal academic, and normal technical, based on their test results. Essentially, from a very young age, children would be separated based on tests, and those at the top would be given favourable opportunities, such as access to better teaching to maximise their potential, and this would be compounded throughout their education. With a highly educated, hard-working, and English-speaking workforce, Singapore began to attract investment on a scale never seen before, and quickly emerged as a leading global hub for finance and professional services. Also throughout this period, the population boomed as economic opportunities increased and people felt more comfortable about starting a family. As a consequence, since its formation, Singapore's population has increased by 3 times, leading to measures at some points to stop people from having more than 2 kids to keep a lid on the situation. There's no doubt that in this period, Singapore was booming, and every year more and more people were attracted by generous work visas and lucrative jobs. But these were slowly building some bigger issues, which Singapore is now only starting to deal with. Today, the nation grapples with an overstretched, stressed workforce, a housing affordability crisis, and a cost of living problem, all of which stem from past policies and require urgent attention to secure a sustainable future. Perhaps the most important issue for people living in Singapore is that of housing. Not only are there not enough homes, but the ones which exist have become unaffordable for the vast majority of the population, making home ownership for first-time buyers nearly impossible without an income far above the average or financial support from family members. Despite being a very small island, housing hasn't been an issue in Singapore until recently. This is because in the 1960s, the Singapore government established the Housing and Development Board, or HDB, to address severe housing shortages and improve living conditions for its citizens. They rapidly constructed affordable public housing units, transforming the urban landscape and providing homes for the majority of the population. By offering subsidised flats for sale and lease, the government not only alleviated housing scarcity, but also promoted home ownership as a means of social stability and economic growth. Today, over 80% of residents now live in high-rise public housing blocks provided by HBD on leasehold land. However, despite previous successes, recent challenges have emerged in maintaining the affordability and accessibility of social housing. As Singapore's population continues to grow and urbanise, demand for HDB flats has outpaced supply, leading to increased competition and rising prices in the resale market. And the government now faces the difficult task of balancing development with limited land resources, which has resulted in fewer new flats being constructed. HDBs also have restrictions placed on them which alienate certain parts of the market, known as the sandwich class, who earn too much to qualify for public housing but not enough to afford private homes. Despite measures including government subsidies, loans and housing grants to offset rising prices, affordability has declined. Singapore's private homes have surpassed Hong Kong to become the region's most expensive, boasting a median price of $1.2 million. Singapore's affordability ratio also stands at 13.7, which means homes on average cost 13.7 times more than the median income, which places it in line with some of the world's most unaffordable cities in Sydney and Vancouver, and well above many of its neighbours. Housing is usually people's biggest expense, and so it's no wonder that as this becomes less affordable, more and more people are choosing to leave. But aside from costs, major aspects of life in Singapore are starting to drive people away, namely the incredibly intense work ethic. And this is no coincidence either. Throughout his time in charge, Lee Kuan Yew stressed the importance of hard work, framing it as a civic duty for every citizen to contribute to lifting the country to upper income status. This focus on diligence and achievement has undoubtedly helped transform Singapore into the economic powerhouse it is today. However, it's also fostered a societal mindset that values constant achievement and competitiveness, known as kiasu. The Singaporean philosophy of kiasu roughly translates to fear of losing or fear of missing out, and reflects a cultural inclination towards competitiveness and the avoidance of losing out on opportunities. Lee Kuan Yew's emphasis on hard work contributed to the development of this mindset, which permeates across various aspects of life, including education, work, and social interactions. While kiasu drives ambition and success, it also has detrimental effects. The constant pressure to excel and be the best can lead to heightened levels of stress and anxiety, contributing towards burnout, especially in academic and professional settings. A recent survey found that over 40% of Singaporeans would consider quitting their jobs for a better work-life balance, and around 1 in 4 people were dissatisfied with their jobs, far higher than in Indonesia and the Philippines, adding to woeful levels of mental health. This competitive mindset is further intensified by the practice of streaming in Singapore's education system, which sorts students into different academic tracks based on their abilities, which has meant around 16% of children aged 4 to 21 displayed symptoms consistent with depression or anxiety due to the immense pressure on students to perform well academically to secure their future success. Those who are placed in lower academic tracks, such as the normal stream, often experience psychological impacts, feeling a sense of defeat and resignation that can hinder their